There's something very sweet about being kind of hamishly shoved into this space. It feels a little bit of like Mishkan, like 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago. We grab every
11, 12,
11,
13
12,
years ago.
13, right? Maybe not quite 13. It was kind of like somewhere after the few years beginning point, but where we like grab every chair in the house, and I would worry about the integrity of the structure that we're standing in. Thankfully, we're on the first floor and it's concrete. But kind of in that spirit, I'm actually going to start my Devar Torah this week with like a curiosity of the Torah, and I feel like it's been a while since I've been able to do that. Not that there aren't pressing things in the world around us, but let's just start there. Let's just start with a little bit of Torah. So there's this curious term that appears in the Torah, Shabbat, Shabbaton. A rough translation of this term would be a Sabbath of Sabbaths, but if you open up a King James Bible, you'll find a Sabbath of solemn rest, and one by the Jewish Publication Society, a Sabbath of complete rest. Or we can look at Everett Fox's idiosyncratic translation in the Shokin Bible, a Sabbath ceasing. Shabbat Shabbaton means something very woodenly like a Sabbathy Sabbath, very Sabbath, the most Sabbath.
Super extra Sabbath.
Super extra Sabbath. And it's only used to describe 3 periods of time. 1 is Shabbat itself, and 2 is Yom Kippur, and 3, found in our Torah reading this week, is the Shemitah year 7 of a 7-year cycle, when our ancestors would let their fields lie fallow and live off whatever the land produced of its own volition. And now we observed our last Shemitah year a couple years ago in 5782, which is 2021-22. This is in contrast to the other holy days of our calendar, which are simply described as a Shabbaton, a time of rest, but one that lacks the totality required of those 3 aforementioned moments. Now, the rabbis, because they can't leave anything alone, offer various commentary. It's still true today. Offer various commentary on this term. Rashi proposes that Shabbat Shabbaton denotes a purposeful rather than incidental rest. And Ibn Ezra teaches that it should be a rest of both body and soul. And Seforno offers that it's an injunction against any activity that would disturb our rest, even one that might be technically permitted. It's a family of behavior that the rabbis call shvut, things that you're kind of allowed to do but don't really feel like something you should be doing during a period of rest, like doom scrolling, for example. But I was curious. There's a lot of knowing, wincing nods. But I was curious why these 3 moments? Why Shabbat and Yom Kippur and the Shemitah year? What do they actually have in common? Now, one is that they all require preparation in advance. Shabbat doesn't just happen. You actually all know this already because you had to show up or tune in tonight. You chose to put your work down. You chose to set your phone aside to carve out a little time to sit with yourself and loved ones and new friends. This is done in a world that equates our value with our productivity, abetted by technologies that constantly demand our attention. And perhaps maybe you're more traditionally observant and spent the afternoon cleaning your home or preparing meals or calling your family and friends before the sunset. Regardless, we all had to do something. All of us in this room and joining us online had to do something to enter that head and heart space of Shabbat. Yom Kippur also requires advanced preparation. First, a pro tip: if you're going to fast, you should drink a lot of water and eat a lot of complex carbohydrates beforehand. But the spiritual work of Yom Kippur also begins prior to the day itself. The opening declaration of Kol Nidre is preceded by 10 entire days of repentance, the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, a period of time when we begin that process of reflecting on our behavior, of reaching out to others and asking for forgiveness. And of course, it was necessary to store enough food to augment whatever the land might produce before the Shemitah year. You had an entire year of not farming. Another commonality is that each of these times are times of preparation in their own right. The Shemitah year allowed arable land to recover, replenish its nutrients, eliminate pests. The fallow fields would become fertile again, capable of producing richer and more abundant harvests in the years to come. Yom Kippur is also a day of potential, not yet realized action. Through the liturgy, through moments of silent reflection and communal penance, we are given the opportunity to set an intention for how we're going to do things differently in the year to come. The thing is, we can't change our behavior yet, right? In the moment of Yom Kippur, you're there at the Copernicus Center with me and Rabbi Lizzie, the davening team, and over 1,000 of your favorite Mishkanites. And if you want to be nicer to that one coworker, or you want to be gentler with your partner, or more conscientious about calling your mother, you'll need to wait. You actually have to wait until there's a chance to do something different than what you might have done when that opportunity presents itself. And Shabbat is both the rest that we need leaving the week behind us, but it's also the rest that we need heading into the week ahead of us. It's a time for reconnecting to ourselves, to our loved ones, to each other. It gives us the space to reorient our hearts towards that which is most important in our lives, the things that bring us joy or comfort or courage or grounding, the things that allow the seeds of love to germinate and to grow and to blossom. In a world where we might feel like we're always fighting, Shabbat reminds us what we're actually fighting for. So every Thursday at Morning Minyan, we do a quick dive into this week's Torah portion. Join us Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. online. Yesterday, we investigated the term Shabbat, Shabbaton, its meaning and how it might be applied across these three seemingly disparate periods of time. And while talking about the Shemitah year, someone noted that people living in ancient Israel were largely subsistence farmers. And so what exactly did these individuals do for an entire year when their fields were laying fallow? Now, farming is backbreaking, time-consuming work that keeps people busy, basically from sun up to sundown. And suddenly, these individuals had 12 months with significantly fewer tasks to fill their days. I think the same can actually be asked of us. What do we do when the fields are lying fallow, or in the quiet moments of Yom Kippur, or in the spaciousness of Shabbat? Now, our tradition provides us one answer. We tell stories. Our rituals are built around storytelling. Of course, there's reading from the Torah, tracing and retracing the foundational narrative of our people from the creation of Adam, that first human, to the advent of Am Yisrael, this nation of God wrestlers. There are also the stories encoded in our liturgy, fragments of the Song of the Sea, sung by our ancestors after liberation from slavery in Egypt, prayers written by the first generations of rabbis, their words building palaces of time amidst the rubble of our holy places, poems composed in the royal courts of Andalusia, or the study halls of Sfat, or the shtetls of Ashkenaz. But there are also our own stories, the ones we tell to our friends on the walk home from services, or in the car ride, or to our loved ones gathered around the Shabbat table. A Shabbat Shabbaton gives us space to remember and reminisce, to speak and to share, to listen and to learn. Storytelling is the happy consequence of having enough time, which is itself something that we must prepare and make space for. There is a lot of awful happening in the world right now. These are the stories that we consume most often through the news or through our social media. I can feel like the persistent narrative around us is of things going from bad to worse. And when there's a moment, just a moment that I get a glimmer of hope, a new tragedy always seems to occur. And alongside our own heartbreak, the stresses of our day-to-day lives, the challenges of illness or unemployment or separation or loss, it can be hard to imagine that things can or will get better. But this is why telling our other stories, ones that we don't find in social media posts and headlines, is so vitally, necessarily important. I had the chance this past week to learn with Dr. Marshall Duke. He's a professor of psychology at Emory University who studies the impact that stories can have on the human psyche. He shared a recent study which shows that children who know their family narrative have greater psychological resilience than those who do not. The power of a family narrative, Duke noted, is that it's neither an ascending story, that is, things were terrible and now they're great, or a descending story, things were wonderful and now they're awful, but an oscillating narrative with both good and bad, sometimes happening in sequence and sometimes happening simultaneously. The expectation in life, he said, is that there will be good times, but those will be temporary. And there will be bad times, and those will also be temporary. The lesson is that we as a family have found a way to get through each of them in our history, and more importantly, in our future. Things will be okay. The story of the Jewish people, our family, is an oscillating narrative. The Torah is not a straight line from oppression to liberation, wandering to homecoming, but one that veers and vacillates between all of these things. Dancing as a free people on the shore of the Reed Sea is quickly followed by the murderous pursuit of Amalek, who picks off our weakest, our most vulnerable, our most precious. The lack of faith that was expressed through the golden calf and the terrible consequences that followed comes just before the divine presence fills the Mishkan, and our ancestors come to live in intimate proximity with God. Our people leave the land of Israel to return to the land of Israel, to be displaced from the land of Israel, to return again and again and again. And yet, at the end of the story, which is this moment, here, right now, with all of you in this room, we're here. We're here. I can't guarantee that things will be okay tomorrow. I can't guarantee that they'll be okay next year either. But I do know that listening to the stories of our people, our family, that they will be okay again. If only we continue to make the journey, if only we continue to put one foot in front of the other. This is what our stories teach us, the lesson of our history. The important thing, especially in moments like these, is to take the time, to make the time, to tell them. Now, this doesn't mean that loss isn't painful. This doesn't mean that our heartbreak isn't any less real. We owe it to ourselves and to each other to listen to the difficult stories of this past week, of these 8 months, of the times when our lives have been shattered, left in fragments. We must bear witness, to hold one another with care and compassion, to take action, as Eli reminded us, to help piece things back together. The narrative of our people is a reminder that there is something on the other side of tragedy. And in moments of happiness, which will happen, they do happen, our stories remind us to hold our blessings close with intention and with gratitude, because those don't last forever either. The reality is that we usually live in both places, grief and joy, despair and hope, brokenness and a sense of being whole. Our stories help us make sense of this psychic, spiritual wilderness, showing us where we have come from and pointing the path toward where we are going. And so right now, we're invited into the spaciousness of Shabbat. We are given this time of Shabbat, Shabbaton, a solemn rest, a complete rest, a rest of ceasing. I want to encourage you to put down your phone just a little longer today. To leave that to-do list until tomorrow. It'll still be there tomorrow, I promise. Take the long walk home, especially if you have an umbrella. Take the long walk home. And as you do, tell a story. It can be a story about our people. It can be a story about your family. It can be a story about you. And if it's a story about something good, what happened to you when the good ended? And if it's a story about something bad, what was waiting for you to catch you when the bad passed you by? As we set down our tools and our to-dos to sit and share our stories with each other. Our words can become the nourishment for the fallow fields of our hearts and our minds, the seeds that will grow in the coming days and weeks into a memory of our resilience, into a foundation for courageous action, into the kind of broad vision that allows us to maintain hope. A rich and a bountiful harvest that will sustain us through whatever lies ahead. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.